Hey everybody, welcome back to Parkitect. And for today I want to take a look at Batavia Cay because that's been available for quite a while and I really want to get to it now. And this is quite a large scenario compared to the other ones so far. We need to get a total of 1,000 guests, which is gonna be a bit more difficult than everything so far. The operating profit with $5,000 is also quite high. And the challenge goal here is to complete it all within year 3, which I'm definitely not gonna make, we all know that. But that's pretty tough when we compare to some of the stuff that we've seen so far. So just in this area in general, also figuring that Happy Cove Harbor and Biscayne Beach are gonna be quite tough scenarios, the difficulty really seems to kind of ramp up. In any case, let's get into this scenario and see what it looks like. I'm just pretending that I don't know what this looks like because I have seen this before. First of all, I'm just going to make the entrance free because I'm nice like that. I'm just going to make the rides more expensive. But yeah, this is actually a really cool map. This is one of the scenarios that I didn't make, but when I first saw this, I was actually really impressed by how nice of a sort of island-based scenario this is with 2 dueling coasters in the middle. And you might know that I really love dueling coasters. I always built a lot of them when I played Roller Coaster Tycoon, so it's really cool to see something like this here. But aside from the coasters and some basic scenery, there really isn't all too much to the park. So there's a lot of room for expansion, which we're gonna need because we need to get 1,000 guests in this park. So I think that'll be all. I'm just gonna turn on the research, and actually, before I do that, check what kind of rides we have. Ooh, we actually have a lot from the start, especially compared to all of the scenarios so far. Definitely seems like a scenario where they give you a lot of land, a lot of rides, but you also need to get a very difficult goal at the same time. We don't have very cool coasters though, so I'm definitely gonna research the coasters first. Let's get them researching coasters. And also, I'm very curious about the stats of these things. Yeah, that's pretty good. So let's raise the price on that quite a bit. I think you can probably raise it to $15. Not entirely sure, but we'll see if they want to pay. And if people want to pay for that, that's going to make us a lot of money. So that is basically it. I'm going to try and come up with a way to somehow bring this massive park together and do something with this path over here, which pretty much leads nowhere at the moment. We'll see what I can do with the park, so let's get started. Alright, so I'm starting out with the wave swing, or the chair swing, which is always such a good ride to start out with, I think, as it's especially good for areas where paths kind of converge, like at the entrance of a park, because it's a really good ride to just put on display and have people look at. So I figured it would be a good ride to start with. And then next to that, I'm building an entrance plaza. I figured this would be a good place for a plaza instead of right from the start, because over here we have that small lake, or well, really it's more of a pond, I guess, where the coasters do that curve over it. And I thought that looks really cool. It's a nice water element that kind of provides some path and coaster and an environment interaction. So I decided to kind of make that the focus of this plaza, kind of point it toward that area so people can look at the coasters, walk into the park, see the coasters kind of in the distance and be like, hey, I want to get into that. So I think this works out for a general simple structure of this entrance area here. And then my final ride here is the carousel. Of course, it's a classic as well. And I decided to cover this thing, even though you don't necessarily need to put a roof over a carousel because they already have one. It's something that you do often see, even with the oldest steam carousels. So if you're looking for flat rides to design a roof for, I think a carousel is honestly one of the better ones to do that. I decided to go for a bit of a modern flair this time around, go for a glass roof. And to be honest, I'm still not really running out of ideas for these roof covers. This one is a little bit similar to one that I've done earlier, but still, everyone so far has had different variations of colors and pieces and shapes, which is really fun to design. That said, I don't know if I'm gonna run out of ideas by the end of this playthrough, because I do intend to finish all of the scenarios, and by the time we get to the last scenarios, I've probably built a lot of roofs for flat rides. But so far, going pretty strong there, and hopefully I'll be able to keep coming up with new ideas. Anyway, moving on from that, I'm building a very small food court, and it's really just this small because there isn't much more space. This is why I kind of struggled, actually, coming up with a way to use this entrance area, because it's really quite crammed. So this food court is just going to be 2 simple stalls, really simple. No big restaurant building or anything like that. So I'm going to build some food elsewhere in the park as well, kind of scatter that around. Especially because the layout of the park is really large as well, and we've already got some paths running throughout the entire perimeter of the island. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And finally, here's a toilet building, because this is just one of those little gameplay elements that I am way too prone to forgetting. So I'm gonna try not to forget these kinds of things this time around. And actually, for this scenario, I'm really focusing a bit more on the gameplay as opposed to just scenery like I've been doing more so far. Partly because the goal is just really that huge, because we need to get to 1,000 guests and $5,000 income a month, which is pretty sizable. But also just because I think in general I'm gonna have to start shifting a little bit more to gameplay focused playstyle, where I look a little bit more at actually micromanaging the park and working on the economy. Because otherwise I might actually start failing these things, and so far it's been quite a smooth ride, but I can't imagine what's gonna happen if I end up completely destroying a park that I already put a lot of effort into and have to start over or something like that. So definitely don't want to get into that kind of situation, so I'm gonna do my best to focus a bit more on the management aspect of the game as well. And hell, I think the management and the design are pretty intertwined even here, but I'll get back to that later in the next real-time segment. For now, one of the things I should probably note is that I just built a staff room, which is another one of these things that I always tend to forget, so I'm getting that in this time. So hopefully my staff should be a little bit happier as well. And finally, I want to get into the first coaster of the park. Now, I was researching coasters to try and get a type that I wanted to build, and I ended up getting the stand-up coaster, and at first I felt, well, I don't want to build this thing sucks, nobody likes the stand-up coaster. But then I kind of thought to myself, I think it works out alright with the layout of this park. We have this flat area that kind of needs to be filled, and I think a stand-up coaster is good to do this with, because my intent with this park is to make it sort of like a Magic Mountain, like just tangle of roller coasters on that hill, where you get different roller coasters kind of interacting with each other and all kind of conforming to the terrain. But when it comes to terrain coasters, stand-up coasters aren't really that good at that. They're typically just a simple loop corkscrew layout with a helix, and that's that. So if I want to fill this more flat plane on this side of the island, I think something like a stand-up coaster would work best. So I ended up going with this. I've been struggling for a while with the layouts because I wanted to get 2 loops in at the start, but I ended up going for 1 loop just because that fit much better. I know it seems like there's a lot of open space here that I could use that I wasn't really making use of with the 2 loop layout ideas, but really in my mind I was trying to block off a lot of the land that I have here, because I wanted to build a vertical drop tower right on top of that hill and another flat ride next to it as well. So I want to keep a lot of this area empty enough to build some flat rides, so there can be more than just a coaster in this area. So that's why I was struggling to fit this coaster in here, because even though it looks like I have a lot of space, I was trying to plan ahead a little bit and kind of worked myself into a corner there. So yeah, the layout is very simple. It's a stand-up Togo stand-up coaster, a standard Togo stand-up coaster with a loop, 2 corkscrews, and finally that classic Togo helix of death, which I think this is a pretty good layout. I actually think it's more realistic than the one that I had in Adventure Island, so a small improvement there, and I think it works a bit better with the park as well. This one is going to have a bunch more interaction with the paths and some of the flat rides and the scenery that's going to be around it. So altogether, I'm happy with this layout, and even with the stand-up coaster in general, because even though it's such an unpopular opinion, to think that stand-up coasters are a fun coaster. I think they really are. And well, I guess Marcel Vos actually has admitted that his favorite coaster in Roller Coaster Tycoon is the stand-up coaster, but even in that game it was kind of unpopular. And now in real life it is definitely unpopular because Togo in general as a coaster manufacturer is hated on by a lot of coaster enthusiasts, and stand-up coasters aren't exactly the most popular either. Nobody's really building them anymore, and they are slightly just being dismantled. So yeah, it's not a great thing, but I personally like it. The only stand-up coaster that I've ever been on was a Togo in Yomiuri Land in Tokyo, but I thought it was really enjoyable, especially the vertical loop. So I like these things, and I'm down to build them more in my scenarios in the future as well. Now, I'm running behind a little bit again. This is the station building. It's pretty simple and very generic, tropical feeling, I think. I do like the color scheme on this, because it is a play on the color scheme of the coaster itself, but one that I think actually works quite well and doesn't feel like it's too forced, with that dark pink roof and the green walls, which work really well, I think, with the wooden beams and pillars, which just have their beige-ish color that I took from the buildings that are already in the scenario. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this station actually, and with the ride in general. Now, I have to apologize because I forgot to record this next segment, so I've been playing the game for 2 hours just now, and at the end of it I realized that I didn't record any of it. So to try and make up for that, I'm just gonna have a slightly longer real-time segment here, where I'm gonna go over what I've built and explain some of the thought processes behind it. So yeah, let's see. Alright, so here we are, and the park looks completely different already. So this is what I was talking about. I wanted to get this, oh, I still need to open that. Here we go, the launched drop tower. And there are some bumper cars over here. I quite actually like this exit and entrance path that we've got going here. Although maybe I should put a sign at the exit to try and prevent people from walking in here thinking there's something in there. But yeah, the whole kind of jungle-ish look to this area is quite cool, I think. And then the interaction that the stand-up coaster has with the rest of this area, especially with the loop and the corkscrew over the path, I think that's really cool, and just one of these ways where you can really put your rides on display. Now, obviously, there's this other thing in this area now too, and I'm actually really proud of this one. This is one of my favorite layouts so far, at least for the flying coaster. So, yeah, this is a B&M flying coaster. Am I running? No, I am running 2 trains on this, good. So, a decent capacity. And a decently thrilling coaster too. I'm asking for $15 to enter this ride as well. And the guests are paying for it, so that's pretty good. And the layout is something that I struggled with quite a bit because I wanted to make this as terrain conforming as I could. So we have the area over here, which is quite high up. I think even at the bottom of this drop, it's at 7, whereas at the bottom of this drop, it's around 4. So we go from the drop into this turnaround to a fly to lie, and then back from a lie to fly into a pretzel loop, which is something that I think works out quite well in Parkitect. It doesn't quite look like a pretzel from this perspective in any case. From this perspective you can kind of see the pretzel, but yeah, not quite as much, not quite as pretzel-like as they typically are in real life. But it's a very fun element, and it works really well in this game. Into a corkscrew followed up by another twist, which is something fun as well, I think. And finally some curves, because there's not a lot of speed left at this point in the layout, and you can't really go lower than this area. So I think that's a good way to finish the ride without losing too much speed. And really, it's a decently realistic layout as well, I think. I had the comment on the last video that a lot of my thrill rides so far have been too slow, and that is definitely true. To be honest, I don't have a very good idea of exactly how fast rides would be realistically in this game, because everything is kind of upscaled. The guests are really big compared to the rides, so you know, everything is, you can definitely tell what things are, and you can tell that they are based on real life rides, but it's on a sort of cartoony scale. So to be honest, I always found it quite difficult to judge exactly how fast things are going, and I'm mostly just building in a sense that kind of feels right. And to be honest, I think the speed of this ride feels right. It doesn't feel like it's flying too high over this element, doesn't feel like it's stalling for too long on top of the pretzel loop here. So honestly, I think the speed of most of the rides so far has been fine. It's much slower if you compare it to a game like Roller Coaster Tycoon, for instance. But, you know, if you consider that realistically this ride is kind of a downscaled, cartoonish version of a B&M flying coaster, I think the speed works about alright. At least for me, it feels natural. I don't know how you guys feel about it though. Feel free to comment if you think I should make the rides faster, or if they're good as is, or if they should be slower. But personally, I think something like this feels just about fine. But yeah, this thing is pretty intense. Also, to be honest, in real life, they do have some pretty insane G-forces, especially at the bottom of the pretzel loop. And this is something which is always kind of contentious. There are people that really like this and people who don't. Personally, I love it. But you get some crazy high G-forces at the bottom of these pretzel loops, and because you're lying in this section of the track, a lot of these forces are basically going to your head, and just the way that it feels is really intense, and a lot of people don't like it, think it's uncomfortable. Personally, I do quite like it. It's a very unique experience nonetheless, in any case. So yeah, that's the two coasters that we've got, and then there are a couple of changes to the entrance area. There's some more foliage, and I put a couple of umbrellas, or, well, really parasols there. But that's really just about it. Most of the changes are all in this area. Altogether, I think this coaster is a good addition to the park. It works quite well with the stand-up coaster as well. That said, I don't know if I can somehow thread another coaster through this area. It looks like it might be possible, but it might also be a stretch. So I'm gonna see what I can do there. I'm still researching coasters in the meantime. I didn't research any after building the flying coaster, so I don't have anything new yet. But it looks like I'm getting the wooden coaster next. That's not something that I want to build here, so I'll wait a little bit more to see what else I'll get. But yeah, I do want to try, if I can, get some kind of steel coaster into this area, maybe even have it go into this part of the park. We'll see how that goes. Also, I should probably mention that the in-game economy is doing pretty well. I'm already earning $4,000 a month. So it really looks like the guest goal might be the more difficult one. Although that said, I do believe we have to hold the $5,000 probably for 3 months, like it was with the profits in Archipelago Adventure. So if that is the case, it is going to be quite difficult to get to that, because as soon as it rains and people start entering the rides less, or you know, something happens, something goes wrong, and you don't quite hit that profit anymore, it's probably going to reset and you have to start all over again. So even though it looks like I'm almost reaching the goal, I think I have to be quite conservative there and say that maybe I'm about halfway there. But yeah, doing pretty good in the park. I'm just going to continue building stuff. We'll see what kind of coaster we're going to get. And I hope I'm not going to forget to hit the record button this time around. So let's go. Alright, so I actually did my job this time around and hit the record button, so I'm very proud of myself for doing that, and I can show you guys some of the footage of what I've been building. So I started off with this teacups ride because I wanted to fill this area between the coaster and the entrance of the coaster, and just create this whole sort of sub area where you've got a bunch of buildings and flat rides, you know, to kind of make the park in general have the layout of a sort of series of smaller plazas with a lot of buildings and rides around them, and some smaller connecting paths in between them. And I couldn't really settle on a roof for this ride for a while, but then eventually I went with a Dutch gable roof, or actually a Dutch hip roof, which is weird. I don't know why they call these roofs Dutch. As a Dutch person myself, I don't particularly recognize this as anything typically Dutch. Maybe it's a reference to Deutsch, as in German, but even then, I'm not even sure where this term comes from. Can't find anything about it on Wikipedia either. I was just wondering about this for some reason. If anybody knows why these types of hip roofs are referred to as being Dutch, please let me know, because I have no idea. Anyway, moving on, I decided to fill in the area between the stand-up coaster and the flying coaster with some more toilets, because I haven't built a toilet in this part of the park yet, and this park in general is quite large, so I'm gonna scatter as many toilets around the park as I can. I'm not entirely sure about the stats of guests, as in how happy or unhappy they get if they don't have access to a toilet. But personally, I think as a park manager, you have the ethical obligation to put toilets almost everywhere, because, I don't know, being stuck, really having to pee but not being able to is one of the most terrible things. So this is just an important facility to put out there, you know? And finally, I put a turbine on the waterfront here, which is a very unusual ride to see for theme parks. Usually these are more of a fairground ride, and I'm not sure how common they are in American fairgrounds, but in European ones you find them quite a bit, or similar rides. I'm not entirely well versed enough in fairground rides to know exactly which model this is, but I know there are a lot of models of boosters and related variations of boosters and similar rides that are common in fairgrounds throughout the Netherlands and Germany at least. So, a bit unusual, but I thought it fit really well on the water there. So we have a bit of a fairground right there. And finally, I started on what is going to be the last coaster of the park, and like I promised, I wanted to make all the coasters kind of hug this hill here, and before I started on this one, I really had no idea what to do with it. I had barely any space left. So I figured the best course of action would be a launched coaster. I think it also fits really well with the roster of coasters that we have so far. And this saves some space as well, because you don't need to build a lift hill, you can just get straight into the action. So launching into a top hat just because I need to avoid the coasters down there. And then I'm using some of the available space that I do have to build a Norwegian loop, which is an element that was pretty much first starring on an Intamin Blitz coaster like this. So I think that's a very fitting element. And then we have some lower segments which kind of emulate Helix in Liseberg, which is one of the best coasters that I've ever been on, and honestly a big inspiration for this ride as well. It's also a launched coaster going up a hill and having some elements very close to the ground and very speedy. It's just an altogether really great layout that is really inspiring, I think, for launched coasters. So I was inspired by that to feature a bunch of inversions as well as airtime moments on this layout. And by the time that we get down here, having avoided hitting all of the other coaster tracks around the mountain, I didn't want to add too much else in the layout. I didn't want to have a mid-course brake run or anything like that, so we're ending with a bang. We still have quite a bit of energy left as you move into the brake run there, but altogether, I think it's a layout of a decent length and decent intensity. Most of all, it's similar and inspired by Speed Monster in Norway, which is also the park that the Norwegian loop element is named after. So that's the last coaster. I'm actually really happy with this. I really wasn't expecting to be able to actually thread a coaster through this super tight jumble of coaster tracks on the mountain there, but it worked out in the end. And the color scheme I'm also just lifting straight from Speed Monster. It's exactly the same. Pretty much. I guess the shade of blue isn't entirely the same, but overall it's very similar. I just think it works out really well. It complements the bright orange and the pinkish red of the stand-up coaster really well. And then down below that is the two dueling coasters that the scenario came with, that pretty much blend in with the rockwork, then have a color that is super similar to all of the rocks around it. And again, this is the kind of coaster where I really feel like it's a more recent addition to the park, much like the Speed Monster or Helix. So I'm going for a slightly more modern style than the rest of the park so far. Few more bright colors and modern style buildings, and also some modern lamps and street furniture like that. I just think that works best for this area of the park. It's also at the back of the park, so realistically I think it makes sense to make this the last area that the park would have extended towards if it were actually, you know, kind of built over time as a real-life theme park would be. Really the only critique I have of the park is that it's a bit too thrilling. There is not a family coaster, but to be completely honest, I've already built enough family coasters at this point. I also didn't really see a good space to build one, and also I think the two dueling coasters that you start out with, although they have some inversions and things like that, they aren't too intense and they're definitely the most family-esque coaster of the park, so I think that still works out. Not to mention that the meaning of the word family coaster I think has evolved quite a bit in time. One thing that I think is really interesting and people don't often discuss is how roller coasters are getting more and more intense as the time goes on. And I think this is mostly visible in the record-breaking coasters, which are getting more and more ridiculous. With, you know, starting out with coasters like King Dakar and then getting to Formula Rossa more recently, which is much faster. And even existing coasters like Dododompa, just getting a faster launch speed for the hell of it. I think overall there's a trend of coasters getting more intense, and you can even see this with family coasters. Cheetah Hunt is officially seen as a family coaster, and you know, if you look at that, it is a launched coaster. It is quite a long layout, and it has some pretty intense elements in it. I think a few decades ago that could have been a Starship attraction, but today it's considered a family coaster, and I think that definitely says something about how coasters have evolved over time. But yeah, that's just a small thought that I had about this topic. Still doesn't make up for my lack of a coaster for the kids, but they're just gonna have to man up and ride this ridiculous launch coaster up the mountain. So, to catch up a little bit to the video, here I'm building some more flat rides because I didn't really feel like the park had enough flat rides. As much as I love building coasters, you do need to build some flat rides here and there to make the park feel a bit more realistic. And once again, this is a toilet building because people are gonna need to do their business on the toilet as well. That's pretty important. And I'm really just at this point trying to finish up the park, filling up the empty spaces and adding some extra detail where I figured that would fit. And for the rides, I decided to go for the drop tower that tilts you 90 degrees before you drop down, because that thing is just so cool. And I've actually been researching the drop towers for quite a while because I was trying to get drop towers and the research just wouldn't give me it. So I had to work on these to actually get these things. So I'm happy that I finally got them. And then there's the Orbiter, which is a fun and pretty intense flat ride. And finally the good old classic Twister. And for the Twister roof, I decided to be a bit more adventurous, but in the end I really like this roof. It's a weird geometric shaped roof that probably looks better from an isometric perspective than it actually does from the ground, but I'm really happy with it. I think it works well in the surrounding area as well. The only thing that I kind of choked on was the queue line. Didn't really have space for another queue line there, so I ended up building the queue line over a small bay of the sea, which I think actually works all the better. It's a cool queue line that isn't just a simple path next to the flat ride, but it kind of goes out into its own little landscape, so I actually really like that. Until this point, I also have to mention I forgot to add a queue to the teacups, so if you've noticed that, don't be afraid, I'll get back to that at some point as well. I noticed that I had no entrance when I went back to it, and realized I didn't even save space to put an entrance in, so that was a bit of a puzzle. Another puzzle was what to do with this path on the water here, because it's super tight, there's not a lot of space. On the left there's the coasters, on the right there's the sea. So really the only flat rides that I could fit in here without making it seem too crammed are the Ferris wheel and the pirate ship, which are always great options to kind of save for some areas where space is more tight, because these things have a really small footprint, especially the Ferris wheel, which along with the motion thingamajig, you know what I mean, the 4D motion simulator, there we go. That along with that, it has one of the smallest footprints. So from a gameplay perspective, if you run out of space somewhere, I think these are the best flat rides to save for a good location. Whereas with a lot of the other flat rides like the Twister, I think you can pretty much just place those wherever you want. And there you go. I reached the goal again when I didn't expect to, so I wasn't really ready for it. But yeah, this is the park. I made it, and let's take a quick look at how it looks. So, fun fact, I task managered my way out of Parkitect when I finished the scenario because it was 3 AM by the time that I was done and I didn't want to disturb the household. So I decided to leave the game and come back to doing a commentary over the last part later. But then of course I would have finished the scenario and you wouldn't be able to see me getting the trophy. And I was like, well, let's see if we can try and force the game to show us the trophy animation when I open the game at a different point in time. So that actually kind of worked. I just removed the process of Parkitect and Task Manager and I came back to it now, and this is the first thing that greeted me when I got into scenario mode. So this actually works. You can end the game with Task Manager and it'll still give you the animation. So this is what we got. This is the trophy. I actually wanted to show this because as soon as I opened the game, I pretty much realized that this was going to be the trophy, and I think it's a really cool trophy. Definitely one of my favorites so far, especially the way that it interacts. It's not just a building that it plops down onto the map. It's really the entrance building with that little ship that supposedly the people would arrive on. So that's really cool. We don't get any new maps though. Looks like we've got Biscayne Beach and Happy Cove Harbor for us still. That said, I haven't prepared any idea of what I'm gonna do with either of these or which one I'm gonna play first. So we'll just have to see in the next video which one I chose. But for now, I would like to go back to Batavia Cay one more time to check out what the park finally looks like. Alright, so here's the park in its slightly laggy glory. This is by far the biggest park of the playthrough so far, and I have way more people in the park than I expected because basically I kept all of the rides that I was building at the last part of the time lapses closed so that I wouldn't prematurely reach the goal, which I did anyway, and so by the time that I reached the goal, I opened all of these rides and a slew of new guests entered the park, and now the park is super crowded and busy. That's also kind of a good thing, I guess. Also, I'm making $8,000 a month, which is by far the most that I've ever gotten, and really kind of feels like a coaster capital, very similar to Six Flags Magic Mountain, even with the different types of rides that we have. It's not exactly the same, but especially with that flyer going around, kind of similar to Tatsu, I think there's a slight resemblance there. So we've already seen these parts of the park. The flying coaster now looks a little bit better with this new flat ride here. There's this very small queue line that I couldn't expand on just because I forgot to add a queue line to the teacups, but it works, I think. Besides, who's gonna ride at teacups anyway? And then, of course, there is the launched coaster, which, in my personal opinion, is probably the best coaster of the park. Really hits a good speed on top of that top hat, down into this Norwegian loop. This is one of the smoothest inversions that I've ever been able to make in this game. I might actually want to look at this a little bit, because this is a trick that you might also want to use in your own coasters. I discovered it when I was building this, but I'm gonna try and make more use of that because I've never been able to make such a smooth diving loop in Parkitect. So yeah, that is pretty much the whole layout, into an Immelman at the end and finally into the brake run. And then you get a bit of interaction as another coaster enters the layout. So really cool coaster, actually one of my favorite layouts of the playthrough so far, and here's again that element. So I'm sorry guys, I'm gonna have to close this. Basically the way that I got to it is that this element is slightly hard-lined, which is something that you can't really do in Parkitect per se, but it's in a way kind of different, because at first what I had is I had a setup like this, where it went straight for 2 tiles, and then it went upside down like this, but then I realized that if you make this one piece, realistically, this wouldn't be able to be one piece because there's just no piece like that. But Auto Connect allows you to connect these 2 pieces, and then you get a piece where it starts rotating here just before it starts getting into the curve of the loop itself. And there's just something about that which is super glossy smooth. You just have to set it to 1/4 slope up, and then you get this really smooth roll. So honestly, that's, I think, my new way of making this inversion. Be it a dive loop or an Immelman, I think this works really well for either inversion. So yeah, really cool. I'm going to open this again to the people. And I'm really happy with the layout, partly for that reason. And then finally, we have this small flat ride plaza over here. Just a small collection of flat rides, which are all quite popular as well. You can definitely see that the park in general is very popular because all of these queues are filled and all of the cycles of the flat rides are also almost completely full. The same goes for the coaster. I haven't, or all of the coasters really, I haven't seen many empty trains looking around the park. Even the pirate ship has a decent amount of people in it, and the Ferris wheel too. So yeah, altogether, really successful park. I'm not sure if it's my favorite scenery-wise, but the focus here was really on the coaster layouts, which I thought was a lot of fun to do. I think this is some of the better layouts of the playthrough so far. And yeah, even though it's not the nicest looking park, it also has just by far the best stats when it comes to actual gameplay. Really good economy here. And I just have way more money than I know what to do with, and kind of overshot the goal of the scenario as well. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time in Happy Cove Harbor, or what was the other one? There was another one. Anyway, I'll see you at Biscayne Beach. That's it. We'll see. Anyway, see you guys next time.